Good evening and welcome to yet another installment of the No Conscription League. I am your host. My name is Ehsan Ullah, and I also serve as the Deputy Leader of the Workers' Party of Britain. But on a more serious note, I serve as your host this evening. We have some extremely interesting things to talk about, some very exciting guests that we have on board. But before this, I should like to run through with you the general theme of what we've been discussing today. I'm sure you have Netflix subscribed, and that if you are living within the British Isles, you may have come across Adolescence, which is the #1 show, apparently. Now, let's talk about Adolescence for the unversed. The new Netflix series that's got liberal commentators falling over themselves to praise its brave depiction of youth violence. A 13-year-old boy, a murder, a spiral of toxic masculinity and online brain rot. It's bleak, it's dramatic, and it's being held up as some kind of a moral lesson or precedent for the youngsters of our nation. But let's step back, because behind the awards hype and parliamentary screenings and Starmer's endorsement, there's a deeper agenda here, and it's one that we need to challenge. What Adolescence really does is frame working class boys as a problem to be managed. It doesn't ask why so many young people feel lost, angry, or isolated. It doesn't question the economic collapse of our communities, the gutting of our youth services, the closure of our libraries, the sports centers, or safe spaces for our teenagers. Instead, it zooms in on the individual pathology, as if boys are just born broken, or corrupted by the internet, or infected by toxic masculinity, like it's some disease. But where is the conversation about poverty, about overcrowded classrooms, about insecure housing and parents working on 2 jobs just to keep the lights on? The ruling class would love nothing more than us to believe that the danger comes from within our children, not from the system that's actually failed them. And the liberal establishment, they're more interested in lecturing boys than listening to them. We say, don't pathologize the poor. Don't turn working class lads into scapegoats for a society that's been stripped of hope by decades of neoliberal decay. And if we want to talk about adolescence, let's talk about community. Let's talk about investment in education, real jobs with a future, and local institutions that empower and not punish our youth. Don't show this in schools as some kind of warning. Show our youngsters solidarity. Show them dignity. And show them that they are not the problem, but rather that they are the future. And the point that I'm generally trying to make here is that in approaching our youngsters with the tune of solidarity, is that we must work and nurture with them. And what I personally see, is a blatant attempt by Keir Starmer to put it in our minds, in the parents and the uncles and the guardians' minds and the aunts' minds, that using a subliminal approach, that somehow our youngsters need to be disciplined. And we see this as a precursor to the establishment's case for Conscription. Now, we'll move on to our guests, and we are privileged today to have two guests that have amazing CV. They have amazing backgrounds. The first of them, I believe, we have my colleague and also a much senior deputy leader for the party, Mr. Peter Ford. Due to the fact that, sir, you have been a former ambassador to Bahrain, I shall address you as Your Excellency, Mr. Peter Ford, and we are privileged to say that you are standing as the candidate for the MP seat for Runcorn on the behalf of the Workers' Party of Britain. It's an absolute pleasure and a privilege always to speak to you, and especially today, this evening. Thank you for coming on board, Mr. Ford. How are you?
Very good. Not feeling perhaps quite excellent, but fairly good. And well, I look forward to amplifying on some of the points you were making there, Ahsan, about this dreadful program, Adolescence, which is, I see, a double attack. It's an attack by the establishment, the liberal middle-class establishment, on working-class boys on the one hand, and social media on the other. It's quite significant that Starmer referred more than once to this drama as a documentary. It is very far from being a documentary. Its creators have said publicly that it is not based on a true incident, a true story. It is a made-up piece of drama.
Yeah, no,
Mr. Starmer insisted on more than one occasion on calling it a documentary to give it a spurious veneer of authenticity, when in reality, the crime which it portrays is vanishingly rare. A teenage boy killing a teenage girl. There are other much more common scenarios.
Well, we hope we'll bring back our colleague, Mr. Ford, shortly. But if I'll use this opportunity to actually to add to what Mr. Ford was actually saying, is the fact that it's not surprising that you would expect for this work of fiction to be addressed or aligned as a documentary from somebody who mistook a very serious matter of hostages and addressed them as sausages a few months ago. So I would not be too surprised the fact that this appears to be a what now has evolved to become a comical take on how Mr. Starmer and his colleagues are somehow using this work of fiction, which I may say it was actually a pretty well shot. I have been a student of drama in my younger years, and to actually from an actor's lens, the way everybody collectively got together and successfully shot the whole episode on one take is a work of art, and it must be applauded. But it was only a work of art, and it isn't a documentary, as Mr. Ford, His Excellency, has rightly pointed out.
Indeed, it shows a fabricated problem. There is no serious problem of boy-on-girl violence. There is a problem of boy-on-boy violence, much of it drug-related, but that is a problem that the government doesn't want to talk about. Far easier to portray working-class boys as suffering from toxic masculinity, as they call it. This is another invented condition, and is totally alien to the actual situation in schools today. But the government want to whip up hysteria, create a fuss around an invented problem to distract attention from the real problems of underfunding of schools and all the rest. But it's also an attack on social media. It's no coincidence that this program has emerged around the same time as the online safety bill, which is a direct attack on the social media, which the establishment and its media organs are terribly afraid of. And so by smearing social media with this taint of misogyny and toxic masculinity, the establishment hoped to establish tighter censorship. This is about censorship. This is the woke establishment kicking back and trying to get more grips on social media.
May I please ask you, because I'd like to kind of slightly crawl towards how the mainstream media, the legacy media and the social media, and perhaps more importantly, the AI platforms that are now readily available to the masses. We have ChatGPT, we have Grok, Twitter X, etc. And the terms such as toxic masculinity, they crop up more frequently than strictly necessary. And one does say that the Oxford dictionary is perhaps more instrumental now along the ranks of the media houses to actually put something together and to create an agenda. Now, in this case, we have the mainstream media and Twitter X, Grok. It comes up with themes such as toxic masculinity, as you mentioned. But what does that actually mean, in your opinion? And is it being used for something, a more sinister agenda by certain people, I would mention, of the establishment, and why?
There does seem to be something sinister going on. The speed with which the establishment jumped on this, within days of the emergence of the popularity of this program, or fabricated popularity, because many watchers turn off after the first episode. They find it so dreary and turgid. But it's been built up into a major thing and a part of the national conversation. Starmer very quickly summoned a summit of the makers and a rather dubious charity to number 10. And then there were calls for the program to be made available in schools. Netflix jumped in to offer it free in schools. Now, all over Europe, this program is being offered in schools. You don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to feel that there is something sinister afoot here. And it's curious, it's interesting how this coincides with an emerging debate about conscription.
Correct.
And many viewers will be led through this national conversation to the conclusion that these toxically masculine young boys need an outlet like the army. And indeed, in Germany and Sweden and Holland, they're already well advanced towards introducing conscription under various guises. In this country, we're starting to hear about a national resilience force along the lines of the way the army were drafted in during the COVID crisis, which with hindsight begins to look like a dry run for war and conscription.
Well, Mr. Ford, if I could just please add, forgive me if I could interrupting you here. This is an extremely important topic that needs, and I think it warrants more commentary. Particularly in, I'm sure that myself and our audiences, that they will be looking forward to the answer or your response on this. See, a term that somehow it's brewed itself and it's developed itself here. We have a term called the incels. And I'll spell that for the unversed. It's INCELS. That's Indigo, November, Charlie, Echo, Lima, Sierra. It comes up, and it's a shortened term for involuntary celibacy. This term, if one was to look into this, I believe it's extremely dangerous, and it's a matter of concern that we're getting this sort of stuff coming up on board, and what, like you rightly mentioned, and you beautifully pointed out that there are certain countries in Europe that are probably a couple of services stops ahead of us on the motorway here. But the point that we need to raise is that there will be people in the UK, there will be people that are happy to go ahead, sign up for the forces, get their uniforms, etc. But there will also be a lot of people that need further explanation, and they would need further explanation, more transparency on the state of affairs when it comes to the concept of conscription itself. I believe that they are being deprived of this, and by the comments that are already springing up here, some of the people, they already are preliminary stanced that hang on a minute, But the point of the matter is that it is important that our youngsters and their parents and guardians are made fully aware of what exactly is going on, and what exactly is being brewed, and what exactly the preparations are being strung together, so that the masses are mentally prepared that right now, it's normal to send your youngsters in and sign up.
Indeed, I think our youngsters are being conditioned, along with their families, like accept conscription or some form of conscription. It's really preoccupying.
Mr. Ford, I just want to add in something here. And my apologies to our viewers because Mr. Ford's connection seems to be struggling. But I'd like to make use of this. The blatant fact is that I'm not Caucasian myself. However, I was born in East London and I was raised in East London. And I've paid my taxes here in London, and I'm proud to call myself British. So I am as British as Mr. Nigel Farage. I can't apologize for the pigmentation of my skin. And I can say this, that if our territories and if our fences, our borders are under any sort of threat, I would be the first to pick up a gun and ask the authorities where to stand. So we are not a party of pacifists. We are a party that identifies where we that actually narrows in and questions whether or not sending our young ones abroad, whether it's a legitimate cause or not. And in this case, which is actually the main thing that's shouting out loud in the background, is that our Prime Minister, not only has he spent billions of pounds and sent it abroad to another country to somehow fund their conflict, which is unwinnable, whilst our elderly are struggling between whether to eat or heat. It's simply not our war. And that's the reason why we have this dialogue and why we're sitting down and saying, you know what, our people have an option as to where to go if they actually agree with this notion. But Mr. Ford, just moving back to your take on this, why do you think all of this is coming up? And do you believe that there's actually an agenda behind it? And how realistic a proposition does this seem to you?
Well, you put your finger on the nerve there, Ahsan. There hasn't been a deployment of British forces for genuine defense of these islands since 1945. Every deployment since then has been the projection of British force abroad, often in colonies or ex-colonies, or now, today, into Ukraine using our special forces. And this is why we must not be duped into using the term defense and defense spending. It's not defense. The British forces have not been used for defensive purposes for over half a century. It's military. It's militarism and it's military spending. You know, the vocabulary is important. We mustn't let ourselves be conditioned into accepting the militarism. And when you look about in society, in our culture, you see militarism everywhere, starting at the top with the royal family, who are the commanders-in-chief of the military. So it's very prevalent in society, and politicians try to tap into this, especially when they're not doing well in the polls. And I think that's what's going on at the moment, that Starmer has realized that he's failing on every front, made many pledges, none of them being brought to fruition, but he's seen a kind of life raft, the Ukraine war and Russophobia and hostility to Russia. And he's jumped aboard this life raft, and he hopes that it will take him to a safe port.
Well, I must say that I can't think of anybody that could put it better. You talk about Russophobia, and you know, for those that are going to be honest with themselves, the heights of Russophobia in our country that we've seen the last couple of years is unprecedented and something that I don't think that I would have witnessed in my life. With Russian tennis players not being allowed to play at Wimbledon. Just imagine the double standards, and I won't go further. Mr. Ford, this is an extremely important thing that I need to address to you, because we have had two comments already that have raised questions on this. That the publication, The Conservative Woman, writes that adolescence, the program, reinforces the idea that men and boys need discipline, as they are prone to aggressive and abusive behavior. That an implication of adolescence is censorship. Now, the show is scripted facilitator of the Online Safety Act. Do we see this?
Well, it's significant that the only criticism of this program that we're seeing comes from the right wing, sources like the Conservative Woman. Well, I'm neither a conservative nor a woman, but I'm happy to see someone somewhere telling the truth about this propaganda. We have to call this program Adolescence Clever Propaganda. On the left, there is total denial about threats to freedom of speech, about the use of social themes like alleged toxic masculinity for the establishment to get tighter control over society and introduce more censorship. The days when the left was interested in personal freedom are long gone. I've been criticized for spreading material from organs like this, but if the left would do it, I'd be very happy to spread their material. But the analysis is correct, I think. What's going on here is quite sinister and a threat to use and to our personal liberty because of the spread of the tentacles of censorship.
With the thank you. That's actually well put. There's an extremely interesting question which I'm actually quite excited to address to you. But before we do that, it's our general consensus that maybe something that you agree with, that this program, and perhaps this shall be one of many, that we shall come across on our screens, whether it's Netflix, whether it's YouTube, whether it's any other social media handle, with the view to convince the powers that be that the gateway to conscription is a good one for our youngsters. Do you agree with it? And just to which extent do you think that this whole drive will be successful?
It's appalling to try to guide our young people in the direction of being part of the militarism. They should be given lessons in peace studies. Instead, they're being encouraged to go to war. It's appalling that in our universities, there is no money for peace studies, but more than enough money for war studies. So there is something sadly amiss in the educational establishment, and everyone suffers from this militarism.
That's sorry. These are the sorry state of affairs. Mr. Ford, you're currently out campaigning in Runcorn and the Helmsby constituency, the by-election that hopefully we shall see some good results on the 1st of May. I'm looking forward to joining you with all of our friends and volunteers from the southeast of England. 2 questions. How is it going, frankly? And do you see and do you somehow identify the issues that have been somewhat ignored when it comes to our youth in that part of our country?
Well, our campaign has made a good start. According to the bookmakers, we are equal third in the betting, alongside the Conservatives, a long way behind the two front runners, Farage's Reform, which is odds-on favourite, and the Labour Party, which still has a reservoir of working-class votes in a town like Runcorn, which is in a way typical, in some ways untypical. Key fact is 99% white. The people are only interested in issues which concern them. They're not interested in the Middle East or Ukraine or any issues of war and peace. They're interested in paying their bills at the end of the month. It is you're flogging a dead horse to try to whip up interest in these issues of war and peace, crucial as they are. People are not listening, and that's understandable, given the way the legacy media condition them into acceptance of all the militarism.
Mr. Ford,
it's not a promising background in that way, given that our
forgive me, sir.
Our strong point as a party is our internationalism and our being the champions of peacemaking.
You know, there is one thing that, if I could use this opportunity, and I'm happy to stand corrected at your hands. The issue, and being a member of the party, not just being a member, I'm also a deputy leader like yourself, and I've also run for a seat in the general elections last year. One thing that I'm extremely proud of with yourself is that you have focused your energies on the local issues of Runcorn and Helmsby, and yourself being raised, and I think you've spent most of your life in that part of the world, and despite being an ambassador to another country, you've prioritized your thoughts and energies with the people of Runcorn. And I'm going to take the liberty of saying this, is that the issue that we have with Nigel Farage and Reform, although we've got to respect them in the spirit of democracy, but the only thing that they have on their agenda is immigration and boats and people of color. They tend to ignore the fact that we've got multinational corporations that should be paying multi-million pounds worth of corporation tax, but somehow that's ignored because they happen to be donors of certain parties. So I just wanted to put it out there, and that you're doing a fantastic and a valiant job, and I'm sorry to say that that I'm not yet there with you. But I'm glad that the people of Runcorn and Helmsby do have a man like yourself that's actually representing or stands to represent them. It is quite clear that it's going to be a tight run coming up to the 1st of May. The Reforms, they do have an advantage in the fact that they've got lots and lots of more zeros on their budget. But what's your position? What does your gut say, sir?
Well, the bookies are usually right, and their analysis is probably correct in making Farage's Reform odds-on favourites. Farage, you see, comes across as the false messiah, rather like Johnson deceived the working class in the Red Wall parliamentary seats several years ago, Farage is carrying out the same act, the same duplicity. And he's doing it even more powerfully because the issue of migration has become ever more acute, or the perception has risen. He's riding that wave. But in Runcorn, people are almost embarrassed to admit that they plan to vote Farage. There is a realization that he appeals to the most base instincts. I haven't yet seen anywhere a poster for him or his party outside his plush offices in the new town centre. Nobody is advertising their loyalty to the Farage party or the Labour Party. There's almost a conspiracy of silence. Labour don't want to show their faces because they know that they're cordially despised, and Farage's lot, they don't want to show their faces because they know that they're very vulnerable to charges of racism. And so both the leading parties are trying to keep this as a low-key election. Well, I look forward to the visit to Runcorn of George Galloway in a week or two, which I think is going to shine a light on the deceit of the two big parties.
Mr. Ford, I hope I have the privilege of joining you in your campaign, and I'm sure I talk for many. How can our viewers get involved and support you? In which way can they actually stand behind you?
Well, we need canvassers, very simply, people who will distribute leaflets. Above all, we would like people to come on Saturday, 26th April. Put that in your diaries, because that is the day George Galloway is scheduled to visit Runcorn. And we would like as many supporters to be present on that day. Even if you can't make any other day, put that in your diary. Be here on 26th April in the town centre. Follow our activities on the main website. And if you are able to come to canvass, then you can find the contact details there on the main Workers' Party website.
Mr. Peter Ford, Your Excellency, absolute pleasure as always. And I personally wish you all the best. And I hope that our friends and brothers and sisters from Runcorn and Helmsley will come out in their masses to make a change and to give the Workers' Party a chance. And I do look forward to seeing you. But thank you for attending this.
Thank you very much.
I know you have an extremely busy schedule, and you've had to come out of your comfort zone for this. But
it's been a pleasure.
God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that was Mr. Peter Ford, former UK ambassador to Bahrain, and that was his viewpoint on this program, Adolescence, and following on his campaign in that constituency. Now, we shall be bringing on a gentleman called Mr. Christopher Helali. You can Google him whilst I say the next bit, extremely important, because we're going to be discussing tariffs. And tariffs is something that may be a new proposition for a lot of our youngsters, indeed the more seasoned viewers. but it's extremely important to start talking about it from a lay person's point of view moving up, because it's probably something that's going to dictate how the remainder of our lives are going to pan out in terms of finances and global economics. Now, the initial plan included a 10% baseline tariff on imports from nearly all countries, effective the 5th of April 2025, with higher reciprocal tariffs targeting about 60 countries with significant trade surpluses or high tariffs on US goods, effective April 9th, 2025. Now, let me give you an example. China faced a 54% tariff. That's 34% reciprocal plus 20% existing. The European Union is 20%. That's 20%. Japan, 24%. Vietnam, 46%. Canada and Mexico were exempt from the baseline, but faced separate 25% tariffs tied to the immigration and drug trafficking issues, with some exemptions, and hence that was the reason why we had Justin Trudeau kind of teary-eyed a few weeks ago on the televisions. Now, on the April 9th, 2025, Trump made a significant reversal, pausing the reciprocal tariffs for 90 days for most countries, lowering their rates to 10% baseline, except for China, where tariffs were raised to 125% effective immediately, escalating tensions after China's retaliatory 84% tariffs on US goods. The pause followed global market turmoil, with stock markets losing trillions and fears of a trade war. Exemptions include copper, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, lumber, and energy products. Trump's stated goal is to boost US manufacturing and reduce the $1.2 trillion trade deficit through critics warn of inflation, high consumer prices, and potential global recession risks. I'm going to take this opportunity to invite our next guest, who we hold in much regard. And I'm going to make no secrets about this. We've been chasing you for weeks and months, and I appreciate it that you are finally here, sir. Mr. Christopher Helali, how are you?
I'm doing well, sir. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you for being here. You're currently in the mountains of, could you recall?
Vermont?
Vermont, that's it. How's the weather treating you?
Weather's good. Winter is almost gone. The snow is almost melted, and spring is here.
Well, as I was talking to you before we went online, I'm actually quite regretful that I got rid of my bed, and it's probably drifting around through the sewage in the Thames water. Yeah, well, I'll put that aside. Christopher, before we discuss the topic of the Trump's tariffs, you are, and this is for the people that are not aware of who you are, you're the International Secretary of the ACP. Could you please tell us a bit more about your party and where does it stand on international affairs?
Sure, of course. The American Communist Party is a continuation of the historic Communist Party USA. We're a party of the American working class. We believe, of course, in the idea of sort of an American civilization state. We have membership both in the United States and in Canada. And for us, where we stand on international affairs is we stand with everyone who stands against US, EU, NATO imperialism. They're proxies. We stand with the people of Palestine, the people of West Asia and North Africa against the aggression of the US. We're in solidarity with many of the resistance movements around the world. We're in solidarity with many of the countries that are under brutal sanctions including Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, including the DPRK, and many others. We support Russia in its ongoing special military operation to denazify, demilitarize, and of course, make a neutral Ukraine. And for us, of course, we are with the American working class against the big bankers, against the oligarchs, and against those who continue to try to siphon the wealth of the American people into the hands of fewer and fewer people who are ultimately beholden to this ruling elite that we are fighting against.
Well, I must commend you. I must commend you for your stance, and it's quite a what's the best way to put it? It's quite an audacious position to have. But then, of course, that's the beauty of democracy. Now, with reference to with all of this Donald Trump and these tariffs and plans, etc., if I could word it this way, what do you personally make of President Donald Trump's initial tariff plans and the significant reversal of them only 4 days later?
So we've known that Donald Trump has for decades advocated for some level of tariffs, which are basically a tax, a custom duty on imported goods. And of course, he's advocated a level of protectionism. That protectionism, of course, with the idea, the deeper belief being the protection of the U.S. manufacturing sector and the protection of U.S. workers. However, of course, that might have been Trump in the 1980s, in the height of the Reagan era economics, and of course in the UK, Margaret Thatcher. We remember, of course, there is no alternative, that this was the age of attacking miners, steel workers, NHS workers, how many others, not only in the UK, but in the US, where Reagan fired air traffic controllers and smashed the unions, and of course, began to deindustrialize our economy. Our two economies deindustrialized at the same moment. And that was because they were controlled by a set of political forces that took their economic policies from the Chicago School and from the Austrian School of Economics. We think here, of course, of Milton Friedman, von Hayek, and of course, by extension, even philosophers like Ayn Rand, who thought to themselves that capitalism at its purest form must be unrestrained. The government must basically deconstruct and dismember all of the protections that were built either by the labor governments after World War II or by FDR and the New Deal after the Great Depression in the United States. So at the same time, we had a transformation in our economies. For Trump and for many others, especially in the 80s and 90s, there was real concern with not only the deindustrialization of the US, but then the creation of NAFTA under former President Bill Clinton, and this idea of free trade, which ultimately meant that US corporations and multinational corporations left the United States and went to countries with cheaper labor and cheaper production lines. And so today, in 2025, we have Donald Trump, who is advocating for tariffs to try to reindustrialize the United States, to bring back all of that industry and all of those good jobs. However, the tariffs themselves can't do that. There's no capability to do that because, of course, as we know, over the course of those decades, wages have gone up, prices for goods have gone up, prices for manufacturing have gone up. So if American consumers are used to cheap products, like British consumers might be used to cheap products, which come from manufacturing lines in the global south, there's no way to then transfer those major factories back to the quote unquote global north, to the industrial core, without prices going up for all consumers. So you can imagine that Walmart and Costco and all of these big box stores, you're going to be paying double, triple, quadruple for your products. So the idea is to protect the US economy. However, that protectionism lacks the fundamental purpose, which is the key issue: deindustrialization, financialization, service sector economies that rely on a rentier type situation, which is that rents really drive the economy. So given those circumstances, it's very bizarre that these tariffs would reindustrialize society without going after who's actually to blame, which is the major corporations and the monopolies that have continued to siphon all of the money in the greatest transfer of wealth in human history in the past decades.
Well, thank you for that comprehensive response. Leading on to China. Now, China's retaliated with an 84% tariff on US goods. Now, what's your frank and general position on that decision of theirs?
China, of course, is going to protect its economic position. It's going to protect its sovereignty. And of course, it's going to continue to uphold the rules of the multinational economic order. And there are rules for international trade. There are treaties and obligations given the different frameworks that exist multilaterally in the international system in terms of economics and monetary policy. However, China cannot go head to head with the United States without reciprocal tariffs, because ultimately China now is trying to be squeezed by the US, and many commentators, including in the Chinese press, are seeing this as an opportunity for the United States to try to gain more concessions and to try to strangle China. However, if you know the statistics and the economics, China as a major trading country, as a major economic power, both within the Belt and Road Initiative, within the New Silk Road that they're trying to do, when you look at all of what has been created in the past decades, while the US was busy with the quote-unquote war on terror and spending trillions of dollars trying to defeat men with beards like mine and in sandals in mountains, China was investing in other countries, which means that the majority of the global south now has China as the larger trading partner than the United States. Not to mention, China has not imposed sanctions on over 40 countries. The United States has. So what do we have in this situation? China the US is imposing tariffs on China, now upwards of 145%. Trump has clarified today that 125% is actually 145%. I mean, we're talking about a 1.5 increase. This is huge, really, when we're thinking about these tariffs. So China has responded to Trump's initial tariff increase with this near 84% tariff. And of course, also commentators are looking at Chinese government control of the currency, the renminbi, the yuan, and looking at whether a devaluation of the currency will keep a competitive edge against the US's trade war. Now, China, of course, has a lot more control over its currency than the United States. Of course, we have the Fed. There's a lot of concern over Fed policy, and there's a kind of a tension now between the Fed and President Trump. But China will do what it can to not only maintain its global economic position, but also to protect its industries, its economic alliances, and its economic framework in the international system, as well as its corporations, and to keep its corporations that are not domestic, that are international corporations that are in China, whether they be in Guangzhou, Shenzhen, wherever they might be in any special economic zone. It's going to try to keep those competitive and keep those on edge in terms of trying to outmaneuver the US's goals here, which is to try to strangle the Chinese economy. And they won't succeed. They won't succeed at this point. These tariffs will have I think they'll have a blowback effect, to use that terminology from the CIA's dirty wars. It won't be successful at the end of the day. China's economic policies are sound, and Chinese control over the banking system, over the nationalized major industries, including steel, oil, and many others, gives the Chinese government leverage and control over their economy in ways that the US does not have control.
Well, that just brings us over. It just naturally transitions us over to the other two major players on the globe. If you look at the world map, if even a 12-year-old child will look at the world map, before they get corrupted, they will naturally believe that these are certain borders. So you have, when we talk about foreign interests, that's a beautiful way of explaining robbing other countries of their resources. And I'm sure that the adults and that our audience is aware of that. So they don't need tuition on that. But we have two major, in fact, three major players, if we bring China in, that you're already talking about. We've got Russia and Iran. And the reality is that these players, they are not Palestinian territories, and they are not Iraq, and that they're not Syria, and that they're not the Houthis, and that they're not Yemen, etc. You've got Iran, who is producing state-of-the-art drones. There's a huge question mark about their nuclear capabilities, etc. We don't know what's going on there, but they're backed up by Russia, and you have this de facto bloc. Which brings me to the next question, and I could promise you, thousands of people that I personally know ask the same question. That in the event of a potential geopolitical event in which US is again drawn in by its favorite nephew in the Middle East, with Iran, what are the chances of this actually transitioning out into an all-out war, which actually shall mean war? And do you think that when we come back to the whole topic of tariffs, do you think that Russia shall get involved with all of this trade war with China? And would it look like a proxy approach or a direct involvement? What's your position on that?
I'll start with the last question first, because it allows us to continue on with the same topic, and then I'll move to Iran, which I think is very important for us at this point. And of course, as an Iranian, I want to, of course, discuss it. First and foremost, in terms of Russia, there is a faction of, I believe, the Trump administration that wants to sever, that wants to be a wedge between Russia and China. They see the growing relationship, the deepening strategic partnership between Moscow and Beijing as a real threat to Washington. But they see that Moscow is more of a natural ally to Washington than Beijing. And of course, there are multiple reasons for this. Some people in the Trump administration like that Russia is a European power historically. Russia is an Orthodox Christian country. They have the same sort of values, whatever those might be for these officials, a conservative, anti-woke, whatever. But their agenda, some of them, has been, how can we court Russia and try to push back China in this relationship, to try to isolate China, to bring Russia on board and to isolate China. The Russians, of course, are having a big debate internally, and I'm headed there in about a week. And what we are seeing is that Russia knows after 2022 what the West is really capable of in terms of their so-called friendship and economic partnerships. And so to not repeat what has already happened, because of course Donald Trump at some point will leave office, whether he leaves in 3 years or he dies in office or he's king for life, who knows? Everybody has different theories. But at some point a Democrat might come back into power. And the Democrats have been the most Russophobic in these past years, especially with the Russiagate stuff, everything like that. So the Russians say, okay, even if we have a good relationship with Trump, putting all of our eggs in one basket will be a problem for us down the line, because another American administration could come and undo everything. and say we impose maximum sanctions on you, and we're going to cut you off from SWIFT, and we're going to cut you off from everything, and we're going to sanction anybody who does trading with you, whether it be in oil, gas. We're going to have a Nord Stream situation again, all of that. So the Russians are far more careful. Their ties with the Chinese now are so deep, especially in these years of the special military operation. So there's no real way that I can foresee that the Russians will, as a whole, move towards the West and try to isolate China. I don't see that happening. I don't have a crystal ball, of course, but I don't see that happening. What I do see happening is some elements trying to say, let's try to cooperate, let's try for some economic partnerships, let's try to have some normalization in terms of the relations, which have been very abnormal these past few years, bilaterally between the US and the Russian Federation. And then we will see. But ultimately, I do not see Russia, for example, being a proxy of a much wider game in terms of isolating China, nor do I see Russia reintegrating into the Western economy as it was before. I think Russia is going to be very strategic now, especially within the architecture of BRICS Plus and sort of this overall developing multipolar world, to be very careful about putting everything with the West. I think that they will try for normalized relations to some level, but they will not go along with the US to increase this war against China, especially with trade, because China now has a dominant position in Russia as well. On to the second point, which I think connects with all of this. Of course, we had a JCPOA. We had an Iran nuclear agreement in 2015 when then President Barack Obama agreed with the Iranian government about its nuclear program. And it was leading towards sanctions relief, which didn't ultimately pan out. And then Trump ended up coming into office and undoing everything that was done at that time. So what we have here is we have a situation where the United States has a very hawkish wing allied with Mujahideen Halq, MEK, terrorist organization, allied with the former Shah of Iran's son, Crown Prince, so-called Reza Pahlavi, who lives in the US. We have all of these regime change Iranians and women, life, freedom, democracy activists, quote unquote, who seek regime change in Tehran. And of course, they are pushing the US and the Zionist lobby behind them, pushing very hard for a tough approach against Iran. Now, there's no doubt that since October 7th, the pressure has increased throughout the region in terms of Iran and also in terms of what we call the axis of resistance. The idea that somehow the US and Israel will launch a military operation against Iran and it will go the same way as Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria is simply not the case, to put it lightly. Iran is a country of 80 million people. It's a proud nation. It's a nation with one of the strongest militaries. Even during the Cold War, during the Shah's time, it had the 5th largest military in the world. So it has hypersonic missiles. It has drones. It has advanced ballistic missiles. It has Scud missiles. It has advanced weapons programs. And it has millions of dedicated Iranians who have fought before and will fight again for their homeland. I mean, if there were tens of thousands of Iranians who voluntarily went across minefields during the Iran-Iraq war, imagine what Iranians are willing to do to protect their country. So I think that it's the craziest of thinking. It's almost Dr. Strangelove-esque to think that somehow the Americans are going to go in there with the Israelis and decapitate the Iranian government, and that's it. In fact, I think the reverse will happen, the opposite. To put this on its head, Iranians who are even antagonistic towards the government and who have legitimate concerns over Iran's economy and things like that because of the sanctions, they will end up supporting the Iranian government if an attack is waged.
Forgive me, Christopher. If I could please just add in. Firstly, I genuinely would like to thank you for such a well cherished response. It's beautifully put. In fact, there was a lot of things that I personally learned in the last few moments. But another thing that a lot of people seem to ignore is that Iran shares a land border with Pakistan, which happens to be the only officially recognized nuclear power state. I am all for peace, etc., etc., etc. And I do believe, and I hope I don't get into trouble for saying this, but I do believe that the United States of America has got a president who, you know, we go past all of the smoke screens and all of the rest of it. There were reasons why he put forward his position that he will negotiate with Iran, as opposed to going in blindedly as a demented president that Biden was before him. I personally think that there is something there, and there is some wishful thinking in all of this. But God acts in mysterious ways, and as I always say before I close my show, that may your God be with you, and may my God be with mine. But before you leave, Christopher, can I ask you, how can they reach out to you? How can they link up with you?
Of course, I'm on Twitter at Chris Helali, and of course, you can follow my work. I've written at Covert Action Magazine, many other things. I work with the DD Geopolitics, so follow us there, and look forward to our continued relationship. We're very proud of all the work that the Workers' Party of Britain is doing, that all of you are doing. George Galloway is a longtime hero of mine, and thank you all again for all the hard work, and let's continue to build these ties together.
Christopher, before the producer cuts this one out, I've got to put this in. The next time we meet, I shall have a beard like yours.
Inshallah, inshallah. I look forward to it.
May your God be with you, and may our God be with us. And thank you for being with us. And I do hope that this wasn't our first meeting.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Same here.
God bless you. Fantastic. Well, this was amazing, I think, and it was the fourth of hopefully what's going to be many. I do apologize for the little myths that's come about this camera in the last few moments. But Mr. Christopher Helali, thank you so much for joining us. Mr. Peter Ford, His Excellency, thank you for joining us. And the beauty of this installment was that we discussed issues at home and our possible involvements and how we're going to move forward abroad. I do hope that you tune in next week. But before you go, please care to add me on your Twitter or X link. You can find me at Ehsan Workers. That's AHSAN and then Workers, WORKERS. Do follow me, and I hope that I could continue to be of service to you. Absolute pleasure. Thank you for being with us, and I look forward to joining you again on 9 p.m. Thursday next week. Have a nice evening, and may your God be with you.